My son's ex made him do 1,000 burpees for eating birthday cake, then laughed when he collapsed. When I played the recording of her saying, I loved breaking him, she just shrugged and said, At least I upgraded. I walked away. That was 4 months ago. This morning, she had 47 missed calls from her therapist. When my son Noah came home and hurled his basketball off the balcony, I knew something was off. But I also knew that if I walked into his room and asked what was wrong, he'd pull that classic teenage boy move and tell me to screw off. So instead, I waited until the next morning to wake him up with a fresh omelet. Except he wasn't there. Then I heard a grunting noise coming from the back garden. I stepped outside and walked to the shed. There he was, on the ground, doing push-ups, sweat dripping from his face. He was at number 65 when he finally noticed me standing there. Dad, I need to talk to you about something, he said. He told me what happened at practice. His awful ex-girlfriend, Megan, had given his favorite hoodie to her new boyfriend, Lucas, the captain of the basketball team. When Noah asked for it back after practice, Megan looked him up and down and said, It actually fits someone with muscles now. Lucas flexed in it while the whole team laughed. I looked into my son's eyes, expecting to see pain or heartbreak, but instead I saw something unhinged. I'm done being the pathetic fat kid everyone laughs at. I'm going to change everything about myself. At first, I thought, okay, maybe this is good. Maybe exercise will help him process all this. Maybe he needs this fire. But within 2 weeks, he'd lost 20 pounds. His teacher, Miss Carter, called to say he was sleeping through first period. When I asked him about it, he showed me his alarm log. He'd been waking up at 4 a.m. to run before his 5 a.m. gym session. Successful people sacrifice, he'd say with a dead serious face. Then it escalated. I caught him doing 1,000 burpees at midnight because he'd accidentally eaten a piece of birthday cake at school. When his grandma visited and made her famous lasagna, he sat there holding a Tupperware of dry chicken while she silently wiped tears from her eyes. I can't afford cheap meals, he said, shoveling it in. His voice cracked. Did you know she used to make me walk behind her at school so people wouldn't know we were together? I'm going to become someone she regrets losing. 2 weeks in, 20 pounds gone. Then, one afternoon, I broke a promise I'd made to myself. I opened his journal. On the second page were the words, My mom knew I was fat and never told me the truth. Noah's mom passed when he was 11 from an eating disorder. She'd cook him massive meals while secretly starving herself. He was the one who found her collapsed in the kitchen. Her last words to him were, You're perfect just the way you are, baby. And now my son was destroying himself, convinced those words were a lie. That night I brought up a therapist a family friend had recommended. No, Dad, I hate you. I thought he'd yell, but he just nodded, like he expected it. And for weeks, Noah went, no complaints. Dr. Patel said he was making real progress. Noah even started having breakfast with me now and then. I thought we were through the worst of it. Then, 6 months later, the police called. They said my son had been found trying to drown himself in Miller Lake. But it wasn't a suicide attempt. He was training like a Navy SEAL, in 40-degree water, lips blue and hypothermic, still doing laps when they pulled him out. He kept saying, I'm not weak anymore. Tell Megan I'm not weak. The paramedic said he asked for his body fat percentage in the ambulance. He was 119 pounds, 5'8". He was asleep in the hospital when Megan showed up, wearing his hoodie. She brought Lucas, who stood there smirking. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, then added, I was just being honest about the hoodie. Noah woke up while she was talking. He saw the hoodie and started laughing, but not normal laughing, the chilling kind. Of course you're wearing it. Of course you are. He wouldn't stop. The nurse had to call for a sedative as Megan backed out of the room. But even after they left, Noah's heart rate wouldn't settle. A doctor pulled me aside and told me something I'll never forget. His body was shutting down. They started Noah on nutritional support, but he kept pulling at the tubes. It's making me fat, he whispered. That night, his heart stopped. Twice.
They brought him back both times, but the doctor said the damage was extensive. He woke up once more. "Dad, am I skinny enough now?" he asked. I told him he was perfect, that he'd always been perfect. He smiled and said, "Don't lie to me like Mom did." Noah died at 3:30 a.m. The official cause was cardiac arrest brought on by severe malnutrition and hypothermia. I didn't say a word. Not because I wasn't completely shattered, but because I knew I had to make Megan pay. I sat in my car outside the funeral home for 20 minutes, watching Megan's Instagram story through tear-blurred eyes. There she was, Noah's hoodie slung over her shoulders, mascara carefully smudged as she struck another pose for her phone. The caption read, "R.I.P. Noah, you were loved. Broken heart, heart, heart." My hands trembled against the steering wheel as I watched her swipe through filters, searching for the most flattering one for her grief performance. The parking lot was nearly empty by then. Most people had left after the service, but Megan lingered with her group, taking turns hugging her like she was the one in mourning. She clutched that hoodie like a trophy. I noticed the faint, dried ketchup stain on the sleeve, left from Noah's last real meal at home. 3 days before the lake, we'd finally convinced him to eat a burger. I stepped out of the car and walked toward them. Megan saw me coming. She pulled the hoodie tighter around herself and whispered something to her friends. They quickly formed a protective semicircle. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I just want the hoodie." That was all I said. Megan's eyes filled with fresh tears as she pressed the fabric to her face. She said it was all she had left of him, that she needed something, anything to remember him by. Her friends nodded like I was some heartless villain. Then Lucas appeared from behind them, Noah's former teammate, now Megan's defender. He stepped in front of me and said I needed to move on, that everyone grieves in their own way. Over his shoulder, I saw Megan's face shift. The crying stopped. A tiny smirk crept onto her lips. Then she leaned forward and whispered words I will never forget. Noah always wanted to look like Lucas anyway. The sentence hit like ice water. I turned and walked back to my car, saying nothing. But not before I saw her bury her face in Lucas's chest. The performance continued. Noah's basketball coach stopped me before I could leave. Coach Ramirez pulled me aside near the main entrance, his face heavy with guilt. He started talking about the hoodie incident at practice, how he should have said something, should have stepped in. Then he told me something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't the first time. Megan had a pattern. She collected trophies. I drove home in a fog, drained, broken. But by the next morning, that fog had hardened into something sharper. I couldn't let this go, not when Noah's death was already becoming her story to tell. The first time I saw her selling memorial bracelets was outside the school. She'd set up a small table with Noah's senior photo, the one where he was still whole, still smiling. "In memory of Noah," the sign said. "Bracelets, $15 each." She was keeping the money. I watched from across the street as students lined up, eager to show support. She even used his last Instagram photo without asking, the one I took of him shooting hoops in our driveway, 2 months ago. That night, my sister called. She said people were worried, that I hadn't been myself since the funeral. Had I thought about grief counseling, a support group? That's when I realized Megan had already begun rewriting the narrative. The grieving girlfriend, the unstable father. I could see how this would unfold. That night, I went through Noah's room more carefully. Behind his desk, wedged between old textbooks, I found a notebook I'd never seen before. My hand shook as I opened it. Page after page of dated entries. Not quite a diary, something colder, methodical, precise. He documented everything. Every cruel remark, every moment of public shame, every time she made him feel worthless. The entries went back 8 months. They began just 2 weeks into their relationship. November 3rd.
She said my laugh was embarrassing, in front of her friends. December 18th. Made me wait in the car during Emily's party because she didn't want people to see us arrive together. January 22nd. Called me her practice boyfriend when she thought I couldn't hear. The next morning, Megan's mother called. Mrs. Whitaker's voice was carefully controlled, gentle, sympathetic, but unmistakably firm. She said she understood I was grieving, but Megan was just a teenage girl who had made some mistakes. We all say things we don't mean, and with college applications coming up, all this stress wasn't good for anyone. The threat was subtle, but it was there. That afternoon, I created the anonymous social media account. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet space to document the truth. I started screenshotting Megan's posts about Noah. Then I paired them side by side with the cruel messages I'd found in his phone. The contrast was staggering, her public grief, her private cruelty. 2 days later, Lucas's parents invited me over for coffee. The Walkers were good people. They looked uneasy sitting across from me at their kitchen table. They said they were worried about Megan's influence on their son. Mrs. Walker had noticed subtle changes in Lucas since he'd started spending time with her. Nothing they could point to directly, but something felt off. I kept digging. Inside Noah's backpack, I found more than his calculator and notes. Megan had kept other things. A team photo. She'd drawn hearts around Lucas's face. His AP Physics homework. She was using it now for her own class. She'd been posting some of these items on her stories as precious memories, but I noticed the price tags on her memorial merch. She was profiting from my son's death in every way she could. Then Megan's best friend Lexi messaged me. She said she was afraid of Megan, but couldn't prove anything. She'd seen her destroy people before, but the blame always fell on the victim. She deleted the message minutes later, but I had already taken a screenshot. My brother came to visit the next week. He sat with me in Noah's room, silently going through the evidence. He told me I needed to let go, that this obsession wasn't healthy. He mentioned Megan's family was considering a restraining order after what happened in the parking lot. The walls were closing in, but I couldn't stop, not when I kept uncovering more. In Noah's phone, buried deep in the archived messages, I found texts from Megan. She didn't just call him her practice boyfriend behind his back, she said it directly to him, casually, like it meant nothing. The messages were dated during the so-called honeymoon phase of their relationship. She'd been cruel from the beginning. Then I saw her at another school event, with someone new. Another overweight boy from Noah's class, Daniel Chen. Photos of them at the gym together popped up on her feed. Captions filled with inspirational nonsense about transforming his life. The pattern was repeating itself right in front of everyone's eyes. I couldn't focus at work. During a presentation on brand transformation, I just sat there, staring at the slide. All I could think about was Noah's transformation. My boss suggested I take some time off. I agreed, but I didn't tell him what I was using that time for. I was documenting everything. My next stop was the school counselor. Miss Klein listened politely as I laid it all out, my concerns, the evidence, the pattern, but her response was predictable. Megan was grieving in her own way. Teenagers process trauma differently. Had I considered that maybe I was projecting my own guilt? I walked out as soon as I realized her daughter Emily was one of Megan's closest friends. Then came the day I followed Megan to the mall. I'm not proud of it, but I had to see. She tried on designer clothes for 2 hours. Noah's hoodie tied around her waist like it was a fashion statement. She laughed with her friends, took selfies, acted like any other teenager on a shopping trip. Except she was wearing my son's dead hoodie, like an accessory. The breaking point came when Noah's best friend, Elijah, finally cracked. He'd been carrying guilt since the funeral. We met over coffee, and he poured everything out. He showed me screenshots from a private group chat called Drama King. Megan had shared Noah's most vulnerable texts in there. She mocked him while he was having a breakdown. The messages were dated the night before he went to the lake. She turned his lowest moment into group entertainment.
But instead of discouraging me, she leaned in close and whispered that she'd seen Megan laughing at the funeral. Not crying laughing, she said. Actual laughter, when she thought no one was watching. Then she gripped my hand. That girl has empty eyes. The pattern became clearer the deeper I dug. Megan dated insecure boys, built them up just enough to earn their trust, then slowly, methodically, broke them down, all while keeping trophies of her conquests. It wasn't romance to her. It was sport. Then Nathan reached out. He was Megan's ex-boyfriend from freshman year. He'd seen my memorial post for Noah and messaged me out of nowhere. He said Megan destroys people for fun. Noah wasn't her first victim. Nathan had spent years in therapy after their relationship. He said he'd been too afraid to warn anyone before, but Noah's death had shaken something loose. I screenshotted everything. Every post where Megan profited from Noah's death. The GoFundMe that raised over $8,000. The Etsy shop selling memorial bracelets and limited edition hoodies. Even the sponsored fitness brand posts that used her tragedy as a marketing hook. She was making more money off his death than Noah had ever made from his part-time job. Megan's mother called again. This time her tone wasn't subtle. She threatened harassment charges outright. But that same night, Lucas's mom texted me quietly, privately. Just 5 words. Keep digging. She's not done. The next major revelation came from Elijah again. He admitted Megan had used him. She'd made him deliver cruel messages to Noah, things she wanted to say but didn't want to be directly responsible for. He thought it was normal couple drama, teenage messiness. He didn't realize he'd been weaponized against his best friend until it was too late. That Monday, Megan launched a grief support group at school. I watched from my car as she stood at the entrance, Jake's hoodie wrapped tightly around her like armor, welcoming students with carefully rehearsed tears. She claimed she was a victim of toxic masculinity, said Noah's obsession with body image had destroyed them both. The other students nodded, murmuring sympathy, unaware they were being enlisted into her narrative. I recognized the script. Noah had outlined it all in his journal. Step 1, isolation. She'd cut her target off from friends who might intervene. Step 2, gaslighting. Make them question their instincts, their memories, their own sanity. Step 3, trophies. Always keep something physical, a victory token. Noah documented it with heartbreaking precision, trying to prove to himself that he wasn't imagining it, that he wasn't going crazy. The school janitor found me sitting on the bleachers after everyone else had left. Mr. Ramirez had worked there for over 20 years. He'd seen it all. He sat beside me and told me something that chilled my blood. The day before the hoodie incident at practice, he'd seen Megan and Lucas in the gym, alone, laughing. They were planning it, talking about how they'd humiliate Noah in front of the whole team. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, he said. Kids being kids. Now, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The next afternoon, I tried warning Daniel Chen's parents. They listened politely, but then they told me that their son needed the confidence boost. A pretty girlfriend was helping him feel good about himself. Daniel had already lost 30 pounds in just 3 weeks. They saw it as positive motivation. I left their house knowing I'd failed to protect another boy from Megan's game. My documentation became more meticulous. I built timelines showing how Megan had exploited Noah's death in her college applications. She wrote essays about losing her first love to toxic diet culture, framed herself as a body positivity advocate. The irony made me physically ill. She even posted excerpts online, fishing for sympathy, retweets, scholarships. Then a girl named Madison messaged my anonymous account. She'd gone to middle school with Megan. She remembered something chillingly familiar. A boy named Kyle had attempted suicide after Megan tore down his self-esteem. She called it being honest about his appearance. The school had hushed it up. Kyle's family moved away, and Megan kept his Letterman jacket as a souvenir. At school events, I maintained my composure. On the outside, it looked like I was healing, but I was still documenting. Other parents started noticing once I pointed things out, subtly. How Megan would loudly praise Daniel's weight loss while her friends would snicker behind him. How she'd post unflattering photos of him with captions like, "Loving someone despite their flaws is the real flex."
Megan announced a memorial fundraiser for what would have been Noah's birthday. She claimed the proceeds would go to an eating disorder foundation. But I knew the truth. She needed the money for her spring break trip. The fundraiser would elevate her image as the grieving girlfriend, legitimize her story, while quietly funding her vacation. I had to act before she profited any further from my son's death. That same week, Daniel Chen's sister reached out to me, desperate. She'd found her brother doing midnight runs in their neighborhood, pushing himself despite chest pains. He was weighing himself multiple times a day, hiding food in his room, only to throw it away later. It was the same cycle I'd watched Noah fall into. She begged me to help before it was too late. Then, Megan's mask cracked. It happened during an incident at a local restaurant. A server had mentioned Noah while taking their order. Megan snapped. She complained loudly about people not letting her move on. She caused a scene. Trevor, sitting across from her, looked visibly uncomfortable. And for one brief moment, other diners saw it. Not the grieving girl, but a teenage narcissist irritated that her dinner had been interrupted by an inconvenient memory. The following week, Megan approached me with a proposal. She wanted us to co-host the fundraiser, said it would show the community we'd healed and moved forward together. When I declined, her expression changed instantly. Her voice sharpened. She warned me that if I didn't cooperate, she'd frame the event around toxic parenting. The threat was unmistakable. Play along or be painted as the villain. But her inner circle began to fracture. It started with Lexi. She caught Megan in the bathroom mirror practicing grief faces. Megan was rehearsing, cycling through different expressions of sorrow, testing which ones looked the most convincing. Lexi took a video before Megan noticed. You could see the betrayal in her eyes, the moment she realized her best friend's grief was just another performance. Then, more cracks appeared. Trevor's friend, Tyler, came forward next. He shared old messages. Turns out, Megan had planned to steal Noah's hoodie weeks before they broke up. She told Trevor it would be hilarious to make Noah beg for it back. The humiliation had been premeditated, scripted for maximum damage. Tyler felt guilty. He hadn't spoken up sooner out of fear, afraid he'd be Megan's next target. But now people were finally seeing the truth. Megan's control was always limited to the school's social circles and a handful of parents who enabled her behavior. She couldn't erase evidence. She couldn't silence everyone. Her power relied on one thing: people's reluctance to question a grieving teenage girl. But that protection was crumbling. Coach Ramirez found something he'd forgotten existed: old gym security footage. When I convinced him to review it, what we saw left him shaking. There it was, clear as day. Megan directing Trevor, planning every beat of Noah's humiliation. She had teammates stationed to block exits. She choreographed the entire scene like it was a play. Coach Ramirez sat back, his face pale. He realized then he could have stopped it all if he'd only paid attention. Noah's grandmother offered her entire life savings to help expose Megan's cruelty. Despite the rest of the family urging her to move on, she refused. I've already lost 2 grandchildren, one to Megan's cruelty and one to the same perfectionist demons. I'm not letting her destroy anyone else. I began connecting with other families who'd encountered Megan's manipulation. We formed an informal support network, quiet but steady. We shared stories, documented everything, watched for new victims. Megan couldn't penetrate our group. We'd all seen through the mask. We weren't seeking revenge. We focused on protection and truth. Every interaction was legal, every conversation recorded, every post saved, every witness statement filed. The goal was exposure through truth, not intimidation. Then came the grocery store confrontation. I hadn't planned it. We just happened to end up in the same aisle. Megan was shopping with her mother. I passed them politely. Then Megan said, just loud enough to hear, "We needed Noah gone so I could be with Trevor." Her mother gasped. Megan tried to backtrack, but my phone was already recording. I captured the admission, clearly. From there, it spread fast. Witnesses started speaking out. Teachers remembered incidents they'd once dismissed as typical teenage drama. Parents recalled strange patterns.
The parents began recalling strange, unsettling comments their sons had made about Megan. And soon, the full pattern emerged. She chose vulnerable boys, earned their trust, and then systematically dismantled their self-worth, keeping tokens of each conquest. Megan's parents began to quietly distance themselves as neighbors started sharing concerns. Mrs. Whitaker stopped defending her daughter publicly after several families brought her documented proof. Mr. Whitaker was seen arguing with Megan in their driveway after Daniel Chen's parents finally confronted them about her behavior. Community members started connecting the dots, realizing Megan's manipulation wasn't limited to Noah. She'd left a trail of emotionally damaged boys through the yearbook club, the drama program, and student government. Every extracurricular gave her fresh ground for her twisted social experiments. Once people started comparing stories, the pattern became undeniable. A parent network formed, informal but effective. We created a quiet warning system to alert each other if Megan began showing interest in someone new. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protection, from a girl who treated psychological torment like a hobby. Even Trevor began to falter. He'd started dating Megan for the social clout, but he hadn't anticipated her depth of cruelty. When he overheard her joking about Noah's hoodie being a victory trophy, something changed. He secretly recorded her. The admission, the tone, the satisfaction in her voice. It haunted him. He wrestled with what to do. Meanwhile, the tide continued to turn. Parents who'd once believed Megan's grief-stricken act began apologizing. They started seeing the little signs. The way she smiled when mentioning Noah's death. How she steered conversations to keep the sympathy flowing. Her grief performance had a calculated rhythm, and now people were starting to recognize it. As word of the memorial fundraiser controversy spread, Megan's options narrowed. College admissions offices began asking questions. The narrative she'd built of the devastated girl who'd lost her first love began unraveling under scrutiny. Scholarship opportunities disappeared. People were no longer buying what she was selling. Then came the most devastating revelation of all. The family of Megan's freshman year boyfriend finally came forward. They had stayed silent out of shame, but Noah's death gave them the courage to speak. Their son had attempted suicide after enduring months of Megan's psychological abuse. She'd kept his shoes as a trophy, displayed them in her bedroom as vintage decor. The family had photos, social media posts of Megan wearing them, smiling like they were just another cute accessory. At the same time, I was working to quietly support Daniel Chen. His sister had shown their parents the files I'd compiled. They pulled him from school temporarily and got him into therapy. No public shame, just help. Later, Daniel told me Megan had been sending him constant texts, flipping between love bombing and backhanded jabs about his weight. By then, Noah's teachers and coaches had also come together. They held a meeting with the school board, presenting a case study of Noah's decline as a warning about hidden abuse. Miss Klein, his English teacher, admitted she'd noticed his writing had become darker and more fragmented. She just hadn't realized it was linked to Megan's influence. Coach Ramirez vowed he'd never again ignore subtle red flags in his team dynamics. Megan's attempt to spin a new narrative collapsed under its own contradictions. She tried claiming she was being bullied for grieving differently, but it didn't hold up. Her social media posts contradicted her statements. The timeline of her relationship with Trevor revealed she'd been planning Noah's humiliation weeks in advance. And then came the final blow. Mrs. Walker had hosted a sleepover at her home, one Megan attended. While bringing snacks upstairs, she'd overheard Megan mocking Noah's death. Megan laughed about how she'd upgraded from Noah to Trevor. The other girls had looked uncomfortable, but they laughed along anyway, too afraid of becoming her next targets. Mrs. Walker stood frozen in the hallway. She told me later, that was the moment I realized what we were dealing with wasn't grief, it was sociopathy. My own reputation in the community slowly began to heal. People saw I wasn't the angry, irrational father Megan had tried to portray. I was methodical. I followed the rules. I shared documentation with administrators, attended school board meetings, and advocated for student protections. The story Megan tried to control was no longer hers. And finally, Lexi found the courage to share even more.
Lexi provided screenshots of Megan's college essay drafts, dated 2 weeks before Noah's death. She had already begun writing about losing someone to an eating disorder before he even went to the lake. The premeditation was chilling. While actively pushing Noah toward his breaking point, Megan was crafting her victim story in advance. Noah's birthday was approaching, and I knew I had to act before Megan could turn it into another theatrical performance. She had organized a candlelight vigil, complete with speeches about body positivity and toxic masculinity. The hypocrisy was unbearable. She intended to profit from the very insecurities she had weaponized against him. But the community had begun to see through it. People started recognizing Megan's pattern. She targeted vulnerable boys for narcissistic supply. She fed on their unraveling, collecting trophies and stories she could recycle for sympathy and attention. Parents began having new kinds of conversations, not about physical predators, but about emotional manipulators, predators who used trust as the blade. I realized then victory wouldn't come from destroying Megan. It would come from shielding others. Every family warned, every potential victim protected. That would be Noah's real legacy. Megan might never face legal consequences, but she could be exposed. She could be cut off from the very kind of boys she preyed on. When she tried to provoke me at a school event, I met her with calm clarity. She made a cutting remark about Noah's weakness, expecting me to erupt and feed her narrative of the unhinged father. Instead, I simply documented what she said, kept my voice steady, and moved on. The crowd saw it. They saw the cracks in her performance, the cruelty that lurked just beneath her performative grief. Privately, the school board acknowledged growing concerns about Megan's influence on at-risk students. While they couldn't take disciplinary action without a policy violation, they started serious conversations about psychological bullying. Administrators began training staff to spot manipulation and control tactics in student relationships. The truth kept rising to the surface. Dozens of families came forward. Their stories were heartbreakingly alike. Vulnerable boys targeted, isolated, built up, then systematically torn down and discarded when their pain had served its purpose. Parents who had once stayed silent out of shame found strength in numbers. Then Megan's memorial fundraiser began to unravel. Someone leaked a photo, Megan posing with Noah's hoodie and other items she'd taken from boys she had hurt. She stood smiling, surrounded by their belongings like a hunter showing off her trophies. The image went viral. The fundraiser's venue pulled out, sponsors vanished, public support collapsed. In desperation, Megan came to me with an offer. She would give back Noah's hoodie if I stopped slandering her. She tried to appear contrite, but her eyes were ice, calculating. I recorded the entire conversation. In it, she admitted she never felt bad about Noah's death, only annoyed that maintaining the grief act had become such a hassle. The evidence against her piled up daily. Former victims stepped into the light. Parents opened up about stories they'd kept locked away. Teachers reevaluated moments they'd once brushed off. A full picture began to take shape. Years of targeting insecure boys, gaining their trust and psychologically destroying them for her own amusement. Each revelation deepened the community's resolve to protect future victims. Megan had thrived in shadows. Her power came from people's reluctance to believe a teenage girl could be so methodically cruel. But once exposed to light, her influence shriveled. She could no longer hunt freely in a town that knew. The urgency increased as her college scholarship deadlines approached. Megan had positioned herself as the ideal candidate, the grieving girlfriend who lost her first love to toxic masculinity and diet culture. Her essay about Noah had already won regional awards. She intended to use the memorial vigil as her grand finale. That Thursday morning, I got an unexpected call from the school. They wanted to meet about the fundraiser. When I arrived at the conference room, Principal Reynolds was waiting, with 2 school board members and the district's legal counsel. They'd received multiple complaints. Parents had questions about Megan's fundraising activities, where the money was going. The administration couldn't shut down the event without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, but they were watching closely. Megan's preparations for Noah's birthday memorial intensified. She enlisted the drama club for staging, got the choir involved for a performance, and even arranged local news coverage. Her social media posts became more frequent, more carefully curated, each one designed to elicit maximum sympathy. She shared old photos of her and Noah, strategically cropped to hide the visible disdain in her body language. Meanwhile, Daniel Chen's condition was rapidly deteriorating. His sister sent me photos of him running stadium stairs at 3 a.m. He'd lost 45 pounds in just 6 weeks. When his parents finally confronted Megan, she played the role flawlessly. She wrapped herself in fake concern, then subtly implied that Daniel just lacked willpower. I watched from my car as she hugged Daniel's mother, then immediately texted Daniel about his lack of commitment. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Trevor's younger brother had been compiling highlight reels from old basketball practices. While scrubbing through footage, he stumbled on something he'd missed before: clear audio. Megan directing Trevor on exactly how to humiliate Noah. She'd scripted phrases, planned the timing, even suggested someone record it for social media impact. Terrified, the boy showed the footage to his parents. The Walkers called me right away. Mrs. Walker had confronted Trevor, and he finally broke down. He admitted that Megan had been blackmailing him, threatening to ruin his reputation if he didn't follow through. She had screenshots of him cheating on tests, photos from parties where he'd been drinking. It was the same pattern: gain trust, gather ammunition, deploy when necessary. I met with the families in our informal network. We now had 7 boys' testimonies, spanning over 3 years. Each story followed the same trajectory. Megan would target an insecure boy, usually someone overweight or socially isolated. She'd build him up, make him feel chosen. Then came the systematic teardown, culminating in public humiliation, always with a trophy taken to mark the conquest. 2 days before the memorial event, Lexi made her decision. She couldn't stay silent any longer. She forwarded me everything. Years of messages, Megan bragging about her conquests, detailing plans to emotionally manipulate each boy, even ranking them. Noah, she'd written, was her masterpiece, the one she'd broken most completely. Sensing that the walls were closing in, Megan showed up at my house, unannounced. Daniel Chen sat silently in her car waiting. She offered me a deal. She'd return Noah's hoodie and cancel the vigil if I stopped spreading lies. When I refused, her mask fell completely. She laughed, mocked how easy Noah had been to break, how pathetic he looked begging for someone to care. I recorded everything. The next morning, Daniel collapsed during his pre-dawn run. Doctors said his heart rate was dangerously unstable. They found he'd been using a cocktail of diet pills and high-stimulant supplements. From his hospital bed, Daniel told his parents everything. Megan had been texting him constantly, sending him photos of fitness models, asking why he didn't look like that yet. The messages were relentless, precision-crafted to erase whatever small progress he'd felt he'd made. Trevor couldn't carry the guilt anymore. He went to his parents and laid it all out. Megan's threats, her manipulation, the other boys. He played them the recordings, clips of Megan describing her collection, a storage box under her bed, each item labeled by name and date, souvenirs like a serial predator. The Walkers and I brought everything to the school. We were calm, organized, deliberate. We presented our case, recordings, screenshots, direct testimony. Principal Reynolds' face drained as he reviewed each piece. The pattern was impossible to deny. The cruelty, the planning, the damage. With Daniel in the hospital and Noah gone, they had to act. Within an hour, Megan's parents were called in. I stood outside the office window as they reviewed the evidence. Mrs. Whitaker's carefully composed exterior began to collapse. Her face broke as she read Megan's messages about Noah. Mr. Whitaker left the room, quietly, shaken.
When they played the recording of Megan laughing about Noah's death, her parents sat in stunned silence. They'd enabled a monster, without even realizing it. The memorial fundraiser was canceled that same afternoon. The school cited logistical concerns, but the truth spread quickly through the parent network. Megan tried to salvage her image on social media. She claimed she was being persecuted for grieving differently. But Lexi had already begun sharing screenshots. Other victims stepped forward. The truth spread faster than Megan could spin it. Then came her last desperate attempt. She posted a tearful video, claiming she was being bullied to the point of contemplating self-harm. But she miscalculated. The community had seen too much. Parents who had nearly lost, or had lost, sons to her cruelty weren't moved by another manipulation attempt. Mental health professionals were alerted to ensure Megan got proper care, but her victim card had finally expired. The school board held an emergency meeting. They implemented new policies: mandatory reporting for emotional abuse, psychological bullying added to the code of conduct, support systems expanded for vulnerable students. It wasn't officially called Noah's Law, but everyone knew why these changes were being made. This was real advocacy, not the performative kind Megan had used to advance herself. College admissions season came, and Megan's applications fell apart. Schools that had once shown interest started asking hard questions about the fundraiser, the canceled vigil, the contradictions in her story. Her scholarship offers vanished. The future she had built on Noah's destruction collapsed. Then Trevor came forward to testify at a school board meeting. He described how Megan had selected her targets, vulnerable boys, isolated them, earned their trust, then broke them down. He admitted his role in Noah's humiliation, and he revealed the threats Megan had used to control him. His testimony gave other victims permission to speak up.
to realize they weren't alone. They weren't weak, and they weren't crazy. Megan's trophy collection was discovered when her parents searched her room. Dozens of items taken from boys she had targeted. Hoodies, watches, class rings, team jerseys. Each one labeled with a date and a cruel nickname. Noah's hoodie was at the top, marked Practice Boy, best one yet. Her parents returned everything to the families. Their shame was visible in every word, every gesture.
The community's response was quiet but firm. Megan found herself unwelcome, not through any official punishment, but through the natural consequence of people knowing who she really was. Her power had always relied on secrecy, but in the light, she was just a cruel teenager with nowhere left to hide. Daniel Chen slowly began to recover. His parents found real therapy for him, not the performative attention Megan had offered. Daniel spoke at the next school board meeting. He described the constant texts, the comparison photos, the crushing pressure to transform for her approval. He said there were nights where dying felt easier than disappointing her. His bravery inspired others. I started returning to work, slowly. My focus shifted fully from revenge to prevention. The parent network we'd built became a model. We created guides for recognizing predatory emotional behavior, support resources, awareness events, a framework for protecting students from psychological predators. It wasn't the legacy I'd ever imagined for Noah, but it was a legacy that might save someone else's son. Megan's attempt to attend community college failed. Her reputation had reached ahead of her. Posts appeared on forums, warnings from other parents, other schools. There was no escaping what she'd done. Eventually, her parents moved her to a residential treatment program in another state, finally acknowledging the depth of her daughter's issues. Noah's hoodie came back to me through the Whitakers. They'd washed it, folded it carefully, and delivered it with a handwritten letter of apology. I held it for a long time. I remembered Noah's smile the day he'd first bought it, before Megan twisted it into a symbol of shame. The ketchup stain was gone, but the memories were still there. On what would have been Noah's 18th birthday, we held a different kind of memorial. Not the dramatic spectacle Megan had planned, but something real. Former victims came together. They shared their stories. Daniel spoke about healing. Trevor apologized publicly for his part. Others found the strength to name what they'd been through. And I introduced the scholarship fund, named in Noah's memory. It would go to students who'd experienced emotional abuse, bullying, or manipulation. Students who needed a chance to rebuild, to reclaim their stories. It wasn't the justice in the traditional sense, but it was truth. And that truth would outlast every lie. Psychological bullying. The first recipient of the scholarship was a boy from a neighboring school. He'd survived a suicide attempt after enduring torment eerily similar to what Noah went through. Unlike Noah, he lived, but the scars remained. The fund helped cover his therapy, academic support, and gave him a path toward healing. Megan's final message to me came through her residential treatment center, a carefully worded apology, clearly coached by professionals. She claimed to understand the pain she'd caused, said she felt remorse. But even in that apology, she couldn't resist mentioning how Noah's death had affected her college prospects. Some people don't change. Not really. Our parent network continued meeting monthly. We kept an eye out for new predators. We supported students showing signs of emotional distress. We shared resources and listened. What began as a desperate attempt at justice turned into a lasting shield, a community-wide defense. Noah's death had unmasked a predator, but more importantly, it had built a wall of protection for future victims. Standing at Noah's grave, holding the returned hoodie, I finally let myself grieve. Not just for my son, but for every boy Megan had broken, for the innocence she'd stolen, for the trust she'd weaponized. We buried the hoodie with Noah, not as a trophy of her cruelty, but as a symbol of his true worth, finally seen,
finally honored. The ripple effect stretched far and wide. Teachers became more vigilant, parents paid closer attention, students began recognizing manipulation for what it was. The community had learned a devastating lesson, but they had learned it. No other child would go through what Noah had, not if we could stop it. Megan's institutionalization brought no joy, only relief. She was getting help now, whether she wanted it or not. Her trophies had been returned to the families. Her mask had shattered. She could no longer prey on vulnerable boys craving validation. That was what mattered. I kept Noah's journal and the evidence we'd gathered, not out of hate, but as a reminder. Predators don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they're pretty teenage girls who know exactly how to find soft spots and exploit them. Sometimes the most dangerous bullies are the ones who convince everyone else they're the ones being bullied.
Our support group grew beyond our town. Other schools began reaching out, sharing their own stories. We created online resources, guides, warning signs, action plans. Noah's story became a warning, a catalyst, a movement. His death had meaning, even if the price of it still breaks me. 1 year later, Daniel Chen ran a 5K for eating disorder awareness. He'd regained healthy weight, found real confidence, learned how to value himself beyond someone else's approval. He wore a shirt with Noah's face, a tribute to the boy who died before anyone realized the danger. Trevor ran beside him, not for attention, but for redemption, choosing action over apology. Our community changed, not all at once, but deeply. Parents spoke more openly with their children about emotional abuse, about toxic control masked as love. Teachers were trained to recognize psychological manipulation. Students learned that cruelty, even when disguised as honesty, was still cruelty. The culture that once let Megan thrive slowly evolved into one that protected the vulnerable. I visited Noah's room less often now, but I kept it exactly as he left it. Not a shrine to his death, but a quiet preservation of his life. The life he had before Megan's poison took hold. His basketball still sat in the corner. His textbooks were still open on the desk. Reminders of the boy who had been whole before someone told him he wasn't enough. The final testimony came from Kyle, Megan's first known victim from middle school. His family had moved away years ago, but he'd seen Noah's story online and flew back to join us. He stood before the support group and told his story. He had tried to take his own life at 13 after months of Megan's emotional torment. He survived, but like Daniel, like Noah, he carried the scars. His presence was a haunting reminder that Noah wasn't the first, just the most completely broken. As I write this, Megan remains in treatment. Her parents visit once a month. They're in therapy too now. They've accepted their part, enabling her, ignoring the signs, prioritizing her success over the safety of others. They started a foundation. It now funds psychological abuse prevention programs in schools. The hoodie rests with Noah, buried not in shame, but in truth. Beside him, after a small ceremony with only close family. The hoodie is no longer a symbol of Megan's cruelty. It's a symbol of Noah's truth, that he was already enough, that he deserved love without needing to transform, that no one had the right to break him for sport. The stain is gone, but the love remains. Our community learned a hard truth. Monsters don't always come with warnings.
Sometimes they smile sweetly, offer comfort with one hand while tearing lives apart with the other. Sometimes they play the victim so convincingly, we don't see the damage until it's too late. But we also learned that truth, when spoken aloud, has power, that communities can protect the vulnerable, and that one father's refusal to let his son's death be twisted into someone else's narrative can spark real, lasting change. Noah's legacy isn't the dramatic vigil Megan had planned. It's in Daniel Chen's healthy smile, in Trevor's quiet determination to make amends, in the new school policies designed to protect emotionally vulnerable students, in the parents who now know the signs, in the boys who found their voices. Noah died believing he wasn't enough, but in truth, he was everything: a catalyst, a warning, a shield for others. I still wake up some mornings expecting to hear him in the shed, doing push-ups, sweat hitting the floor. The grief hasn't faded. It's just changed shape. But knowing Megan can't hurt anyone else, knowing future victims are safe, knowing Noah's death exposed a predator and helped protect the innocent, that brings a kind of peace. Not happiness, never happiness, but purpose. And for now, that's enough.